Hello and welcome again to today's lecture on alternative media and its transformative role in gender representation. I welcome you all to the MOOC course on gender and the media, and today we will be discussing the module number 15, which is gender and alternative media. And under this, we will be discussing unit number 35, which has been titled Gender Representation Role of Community Media. I'm Dr. Judy Hazarika, and over the next half an hour, we will try to explore how media operating outside the mainstream channels has created vital spaces for challenging the dominant gender narratives and empowering the marginalized voices. In a media landscape which has often been dominated by commercial interests and conventional portrayals of gender, alternative and community media provide crucial counterpoints. It provides spaces where women, LGBTQ+ individuals, and gender diverse communities can tell their own stories. They can challenge stereotypes and build networks of solidarity. So today's lecture will cover several key areas. First, we will try to establish what we mean by alternative media. Though the concept of alternative media has been thoroughly discussed in the previous lecture, we will try to touch upon some of the aspects of alternative media in this lecture also, and we will try to explore why alternative media matters for gender representation. Then we will try to trace the historical relationship between alternative media and gender movements. We will try to examine the specific few case studies that demonstrate different approaches to transforming gender representation. We will try to analyze the theoretical frameworks that help us understand these media interventions, and finally consider both the challenges and future possibilities for alternative media in advancing gender justice. Let us begin by addressing the fundamental question: what exactly is alternative media, and why is it particularly significant for gender representation? Alternative media refers to media forms that operate outside the mainstream commercial or state media systems. They often challenge the dominant perspectives through both content and the production process. So these include community radio stations, independent magazines and zines, grassroots film and video projects, and more recently, various digital platforms which has been created by and created for the communities which has been marginalized in the mainstream media. So what distinguishes alternative media isn't just the independent ownership, but several other key characteristics such as the participatory nature of production methods. This blurs the line between the producers and the audiences, as we have already discussed in the previous lecture. The non-hierarchical organizational structure is a very distinctive feature of community media, and the content that centers the marginalized perspectives and the explicit commitment to social change. So when we talk about gender representation, we are referring to how gender identities, gender roles, and gender relations are portrayed, constructed, and circulated through media, the traditional media forms or the commercial media. So this encompasses who is visible and who is absent, whose voices are amplified, and how the agency is distributed, and the range of gender expressions presented. The mainstream media has historically reinforced the binary gender norms, heteronormativity, and patriarchal power structures. Women have been routinely objectified, stereotyped, or simply rendered invisible. LGBTQ plus individuals have been either absent or portrayed as jokes, or they are presented as problems which needs to be solved. And those with the intersecting marginalized identities such as women of color, disabled women, Dalit women, or transgender individuals, they have faced even greater erasure. So, alternative media intervenes in this landscape by creating spaces where conventional gender representation can be challenged and reimagined. They do this in three primary ways. First, through counter-hegemonic content that offers alternative visions of gender and sexuality. Second, through participatory production processes that transform who gets to create media and how it's made. And thirdly, by building communities and networks where new gender discourses can develop. This three-dimensional approach, which addresses content, production, and community, it makes alternative media particularly powerful site for gender transformation. Now let us have a look at the historical context. The relationship between alternative media and gender movements has deep historical roots. It evolves across different eras in response to changing political contexts and technological possibilities. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, women's suffrage movements created their own newspapers and pamphlets where mainstream press either ignored or ridiculed their campaigns. Publications like the Women's Journal in the United States and Votes for Women in the UK, they served multiple functions. These publications communicated movement news. They developed political arguments. They built collective identities and modeled women's intellectual and professional capacities at a time when these were widely questioned. The second wave feminist movement of the 1960s and 70s saw an explosion of alternative media initiatives. Feminist newspapers, feminist magazines, publishing houses, and radio programs emerged as essential components of the women's liberation movement. So there were publications like Off Our Backs in the US and Spare Rib in the UK. They practiced collective editorial processes that challenged the hierarchical production norms, while their content addressed issues, very important issues like domestic violence, reproductive rights, and workplace discrimination that mostly the mainstream media largely ignored. The landmark feminist magazine, Miss MS. It was launched in 1972. It attempted to bridge the underground feminist publications and mainstream women's magazines. So its success and contradictions highlight the tension between alternative media values and their wider cultural influence. Simultaneously, lesbian and gay publications created vital communication networks for communities facing widespread discrimination. The Daughters of Bilitis publication, The Ladder, started in 1956, was among the first to address lesbian experiences directly, while gay liberation papers like Gay Community News emerged after the Stonewall Uprising to build political consciousness. All these terms have been mentioned in your slides. You do some further research and further studies in this particular areas referring to this particular concepts for your further inquisitiveness or further information. The 1980s and 90s saw new developments as women of color challenged the whiteness of feminist media. Publications like Kitchen Talk, Women of Color Press, and Azalea, a magazine for third world lesbians. This created platforms for voices marginalized within the feminist movements itself. So this period also saw the rise of the Riot Girl movement with its DIY zine culture that encouraged young women to become media producers rather than simply consumers of male-dominated music scenes. The AIDS crisis generated urgent media activism as groups like ACT-UP developed sophisticated media strategies to counter mainstream misrepresentations of the epidemic and demand public health responses. Their tactical media approaches combining street protests, video documentation, and graphic design demonstrated how alternative media could intervene in public health crises affecting the LGBTQ+ communities. The digital era has transformed alternative media possibilities around gender representation. Feminist blogs, transgender YouTube channels, Instagram activism, and podcasts have created new opportunities for self-representation with lower barriers to entry than print or broadcast media required. Hashtag movements like #MeToo have demonstrated how alternative media tactics can rapidly scale to influence the mainstream discourses, while also raising questions about sustainability and depth of engagement. Throughout these historical developments, alternative media has consistently provided spaces where gender norms could be questioned, where marginalized gender identities could find representation, and where the skills and networks for gender justice movements could develop. Now let us turn to some specific examples that illustrate different approaches to gender representation in alternative media. Let us consider the print media through the example of Bitch Feminist Response to Pop Culture. It was founded in 1996 as a photocopied zine. It evolved from a quarterly magazine into a substantial readership before transitioning to the digital-first publishing. What makes this particular publication significant is its explicit commitment to feminist media literacy. It tried to teach its readers to critically analyze gender representations in mainstream culture rather than simply consuming them passively. So its approach demonstrates how alternative media can serve cultural resistance functions by providing tools for readers to decode and challenge the sexist media messages. Its evolution from DIY zine to established publications with non-profit status, it also illustrates the typical trajectories for successful alternative media projects. How it balanced the growth with by maintaining the counter-hegemonic perspectives. In the broadcast sphere, the Global Network of Feminist Community Radio Initiatives provides powerful examples of alternative approaches to gender representation. For example, FIRE, which stands for Feminist International Radio Endeavor. It was founded in Costa Rica in 1991. FIRE trained women from marginalized communities to produce their own radio content, prioritizing indigenous women, rural women, and women with disabilities. So these groups are typically excluded from both mainstream and alternative media spaces. So what's significant about feminist community radio initiatives like FIRE is its emphasis on the production process itself as transformative. By training women in technical skills traditionally coded as masculine, challenging the gendered division of labor in media production, and validating experiential knowledge, these projects transform who gets to speak and how. The community radio model also reaches audiences with limited internet access, making it particularly valuable in regions with digital divides. Moving to digital media, the Trans/Media Project, it was founded by journalist Imara Jones It offers a compelling case study in transgender representation. Through podcasts, short documentaries, and social media content, Trans/Slash centers transgender experiences, particularly those of trans people of color. What distinguishes Trans/Slash is its combination of personal storytelling with structural analysis, connecting individual transgender experiences to broader social and political contexts. Trans/Slash demonstrates how contemporary alternative media can work across platforms, building audiences through social media while developing deeper content in longer formats. So its focus on transgender voices represents an important evolution in alternative gender media by addressing the communities marginalized even within some feminist media spaces. So in the realm of film and video, the Queer Women of Color Media Arts Project, QWOCMAP. It offers a powerful example of addressing representation both on screen and off screen. It was founded in the year 2000. It provides free filmmaking training to queer women of color and transgender people of color, then showcases their work through film festivals and community screenings. This particular project's approach illustrates the importance of addressing the full media circuit, not just creating alternative content, but building alternative distribution channels and viewing contexts. So by training the filmmakers from communities which are underrepresented in both mainstream and independent film, this type of projects address structural inequalities in media access while creating content that reflect authentic, lived experiences. A final case worth mentioning is the #MeToo movement, which represents a hybrid form of alternative and mainstream media engagement. It began with the activist Tarana Burke's work in 2006, and it gained global visibility through social media in 2017. #MeToo demonstrates how alternative media tactics can rapidly scale to influence the mainstream discourse. The movement shows how the possibilities and limitations of #activism for gender justice, while creating unprecedented visibility for sexual violence issues and building transnational solidarity. Its migration to mainstream media also raised questions about whose stories were amplified, how the narratives were framed, and whether the structural change followed viral visibility. So these diverse case studies, they demonstrate how alternative media has created multiple pathways for transforming gender representation through critical analysis, participatory production, narrative control, and hybrid organizing strategies that move between alternative and the mainstream spaces. So to understand the alternative media's role in gender representation more deeply, several theoretical frameworks, they offer valuable insights. The feminist standpoint theory helps explain why alternative media spaces are crucial for gender justice. It was developed by philosophers like Sandra Harding and Patricia Hill Collins. The standpoint theory argues that knowledge is always situated, produced from particular social positions. Those experiencing marginalization often have epistemic advantages in understanding systems of power because they must navigate both dominant perspectives and their own lived realities. So, applied to media, standpoint theory suggests that women, LGBTQ plus individuals, and gender diverse people possess unique insights and gender systems that mainstream media dominated by privileged perspectives typically misses. So alternative media provides spaces where this situated knowledge can be articulated and valued. Another framework comes from Nancy Fraser's concept of subaltern counterpublics. Fraser critiqued Habermas's idea of a single unified public sphere, arguing that marginalized groups need their own discursive spaces to develop counter discourses before engaging broader publics. So alternative media creates these counterpublics where marginalized gender groups can develop language, analysis, and collective identity necessary for effective political engagement. For example, transgender communities have developed sophisticated vocabularies around gender identity through alternative media spaces, creating language that eventually influence broader public discourse. So, without those protected spaces for discourse development, marginalized communities would be constrained by dominant frameworks inadequate to their experiences. Another approach comes from intersectionality, developed by scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. Intersectionality examines how different aspects of identity, such as gender, race, class, sexuality, disability, etc., how they interact to create distinctive experiences of oppression and privilege. So, this framework illuminates why alternative media must address multiple forms of marginalization simultaneously. So, early feminist media often centered white, middle class women's experiences, the privileged women's experiences, prompting women of color or the marginalized sections, the women of marginalized sections, to create their own alternative media addressing the intersections of sexism and racism. Today, the most effective alternative media approaches recognize that gender never operates in isolation, developing more complex representational practices that address interlocking systems of power. Participatory communication theory, developed by scholars like Clemencia Rodriguez, helps us understand alternative media's transformative potential. Her concept of citizens' media emphasizes that the process of creating media can transform participants into active citizens capable of intervening in social reality. So, these theoretical frameworks help us understand alternative media not simply as different content but as spaces where fundamental challenges to gender power relations can emerge and through both representation and production processes. So, despite its transformative potential, alternative media focused on gender representation, and it faces significant challenges that limit its impact. Resource constraints presents the most persistent obstacle. Alternative media typically operates with limited funding, equipment, and infrastructural support. So these material limitations affect everything from production quality to distribution, to reach an organizational sustainability. When gender-focused initiatives already face social resistance, these resource constraints create additional barriers. The precarious labor often involved in alternative media production also has gendered implications. Much alternative media relies on volunteers or underpaid work, creating participation barriers for those with significant caregiving responsibilities or limited economic security. So, these issues disproportionately affect women and transgender individuals. The second major challenge involves audience reach and fragmentation. While alternative media creates vital spaces for marginalized gender communities, these spaces sometimes function as echo chambers with limited capacity to influence broader cultural conversations. The proliferation of niche platforms can also fragment audiences, reducing the potential for collective action. The challenge becomes how to balance serving specific communities while building broader coalition for gender justice. Digital platforms present both opportunities and new challenges. While lowering the production barriers, digital environments introduce issues like algorithmic visibility, platform governance, and digital divides. Alternative gender content often faces suppression through content moderation policies that disproportionately target LGBTQ content or feminist material addressing sexuality. And despite digital media's global reach, access disparities along gender, class, and geographic lines persist, limiting who can participate in digital alternative media spaces. Another significant challenge involves sustainability and institutionalization. Many gender-focused alternative media initiatives struggle to survive beyond initial phases, funding challenges, organizational conflicts, threatening longevity. So this dilemma becomes how to build sustainable structures without replicating hierarchical patterns that alternative media seeks to challenge. Then alternative media faces the perpetual tension between maintaining radical perspectives and achieving broader cultural influence. As initiatives grow, they often face pressures to moderate critical perspectives or adopt more conventional formats to reach wider audiences. The history of feminist media includes many examples of publications that began with radical visions but gradually accommodated to market pressures. So these challenges don't negate alternative media's value for gender transformation, but they highlight the complex navigations required to sustain an effective counter-hegemonic space within the larger media ecosystems, which are often dominated by commercial logics and established power relations. So several emerging trends suggest the future directions for alternative media's role in gender representation. We can talk about the innovative approaches to sustainability, combining multiple funding streams, community contributions, grant funding, service provisions, and solidarity economy model. These hybrid approaches may create more sustainable foundations for gender-focused media without complete dependence on either market or the philanthropic funding. Alternative media is increasingly engaging with technological developments like artificial intelligence from feminist and queer perspectives. So rather than simply rejecting these technologies, initiatives are developing critical frameworks for understanding their gender implication while experimenting with alternative applications aligned with feminist values. The climate justice is becoming increasingly central to gender-focused alternative media. Feminist climate communications are connecting gender justice with environmental concerns, highlighting how climate impacts are gendered and developing media forms appropriate to crisis communication needs. Decolonial approaches are transforming gender media practices, centering indigenous knowledge systems and challenging the Eurocentric assumptions in both content and production processes. So these approaches recognize how colonial legacies shape gender systems and media practices simultaneously. So we are seeing increased emphasis on building bridges between different alternative media sectors, connecting community radio with digital platforms, linking artistic interventions with journalistic initiatives, and developing transmedia approaches to leverage different media forms, strengths. So these connections may help address fragmentation challenges while maintaining commitment to a counter-hegemonic perspective. So these emerging directions suggest that alternative media will continue evolving to address changing technological contexts and political challenges while maintaining its essential role in transforming gender representation. So this exploration of alternative media's role in gender representation, throws light on several insights. Alternative media provides essential spaces where conventional gender representation can be challenged, where marginalized gender identities find expression, and where new ways of thinking about gender can develop. So these spaces remain crucial even when mainstream media occasionally incorporates more diverse gender representation. Alternative media's significance lies not just in content but in transformative production processes that redistribute media making power and build skills and confidence among gender marginalized communities. The question of who makes media remains as important as what that media contains. While facing significant constraints and challenges, alternative media continues demonstrating that different ways of representing gender and different ways of making media are possible. So this prefigurative function, showing alternatives in practice rather than just critiquing dominant systems, it remains perhaps its most powerful contribution. So I hope this lecture would throw some light on the complex relationship between alternative media and gender representation, and you would be inspired to engage further in both theory and practice of media that challenges the gender conventions. Thank you for listening to this particular lecture.